build the market for, of course.
I'm ready.
As you're talking,
Right, you're welcome. I'm back at Fire Network. It's me, Africa Maria, with my colleague INNOSSETU, broadcasting live from Kampala, Uganda. Good evening. For those who are joining us for the first time, you're welcome. And for those who always join us whenever we are live, thank you so much for always supporting and loving Black Fire Network. You can still follow us on different platforms. Similarly, you can still Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. No. So today's topic is Unveiling Black Europe, or a hidden history. We're going to reveal a hidden history of Black people. So we are going to share with you documentary, but before that, I'll let my colleagues say hi to you guys.
hi.
So let's share the video.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Hi, GB Jabba. How are you? How are you doing, GB Jabba? Long time. Yesterday, I thought we were going to have a long conversation, but unfortunately, I saw you leaving. But let me hope you're doing well, GB Jabba. Whatever you're doing, it is actually It is 46 minutes past 4 p.m. here in Kampala. I don't know what is your time, GB Jabba, there. What is your time there, GB Jabba? But let me hope you're doing good. We're also fine. We're also fine. Today's topic is like she said. Actually, we're going to talk about, of course, the Black Europe. This in this, what we mean, of course, actually, what we are going to go through today is much of how blacks, are founded actually certain countries in Europe, like like UK. We are going to know more actually at the end of this show. We shall be able to get to know how actually how UK was like how UK was founded, how it has that touch, how it has that connection to the black people, and where did the black people go actually? That who are the first people to stay in these areas? The Scottish stuff. How did they actually? Where did the black people go? Where did this history go? GB Jabba says it's 8 a.m. in the morning, and he says, I'm well on the job listening in. I'll be dipping in and out. Thanks. Okay, GB Jabba. Okay, GB Jabba. So I don't want to waste any time. I want to go directly to the video that I want to share today. Of course, like I said, we shall get to know who are the original British, Scottish, and Irish in this text, because it's going to reveal actually the black presence in these countries. So allow me share this video.
Forgotten facts regarding who the British, Scottish, and Irish people were. So hold on to your horses while we dive in. All right, everybody, let's get into this now. Just want to let you know that my theory is not new. It has been studied and discussed by numerous researchers. However, it is controversial because this information has not been taught in our mainstream educational systems in recent times. All right, before you dismiss this information, please check my research for yourself. This information may come as a shock to many of you, but that does not mean it is not true. Now, I'd like everybody to know that my theory, and I reiterate, it is not my theory alone, because I'm only one of many who have come by through research that the original Europeans had black, very dark brown, very swarthy, brown, light brown, sanguine, tawny, olive, swarthy complexions. Not only were the original Europeans swarthy, a vast number of European nobility were swarthy, and many of them continue to have swarthy complexions until the early 1800s. Okay, so right now we're going to discuss two terms. Okay, the first one is swarthy, and the second one is complexion. Okay, many of you probably think you know what these terms mean, but let's go over them anyway, just to make sure we're clear, because they're very important to the research. Okay, so the first term is swarthy, which means of a dark color, complexion, or cast. Okay, that explanation is straight out of the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, 1828. Okay, so another explanation of this word swarthy is of skin color, complexion, etc., dark, and that is out of the dictionary.com. Then last, we have of a person or their skin, dark, a swarthy face, complexion, and that comes from the cambridgedictionary.com. So if you go ahead and look up the term swarthy or the definition for swarthy in most dictionaries, either present or past, you will find basically the same explanations. Let's move on to the second definition, complexion. Complexion means the hue or appearance of the skin, and especially the face, a dark complexion. And that comes from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, 1828 as well. There are several other definitions of complexion, one of them being the general aspect or character of something. And that definition comes from the lexico.com, powered by Oxford. Nevertheless, just to be clear, when I speak of complexion in my research, I am specifically speaking about the appearance of someone's skin, especially their face. Okay, now that I've talked to you about the term swarthy and complexion, I'd like to go to this next area and talk about melanin. Okay, and as you can see on this picture here, these are many of the various human skin tones or hues of melanin, excluding the extremes on both ends. My intention is not to exclude the extremes on both ends of this spectrum, but they are extremes nonetheless. Because we are so used to going from left to right, because we read from left to right in English, I'm going to start on the left side. And as you can see on my chart, we have pale, fresh, fair, sandy, tawny, light brown, ruddy, sanguine, brown, and dark or dark brown. And then you can also see swarthy there at the top, and you can see what's in between swarthy and most readers that I believe, or in my interpretation, regard as swarthy, okay, as we go on in this research. Let's go on to define the word melanin. What is melanin? And it is defined as any of the various black, dark brown, reddish brown, or yellow pigments of animal or plant structures, such as skin or hair. And that is from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary. And from the Cambridge Dictionary, we have the definition of melanin as a dark brown pigment substance that gives color, found in eyes, skin, hair, feathers, etc. It helps to protect the skin against harmful light from the sun. All right, now we're going to move on to this next piece of evidence. As you can see on the screen, it's from the book Phases of Irish History by Professor Eoin McNeill. He was an Irish scholar, Irish language enthusiast, Gaelic revivalist, nationalist, and Sinn Féin politician who served as Minister of Education from 1922 to 1925. This book was published in Dublin in 1920. I'd just like to add that many past and present archaeologists, ethnologists, scientists agreed that early inhabitants in Europe were of a swarthy complexion. I will be sharing several of their quotes with you in this video. Okay, now I'm going to talk to you about several quotes from McNeill's book, Phases of Irish History. Just as an FYI, throughout this video, I may not pronounce everything perfectly, just because I'm not used to seeing these words or descriptions or places, so just bear with me. Okay, this first quote is from Tacitus, and his full name was Publius Cornelius Tacitus. He was a senator and historian of the Roman Empire, and Tacitus was considered to be one of the greatest Roman historians. That's according to Wikipedia. And so McNeill, in his book, states, it appears to rest on a single passage of Tacitus. He is describing the Silures, a British people whose territory was in the south of Wales and who offered a very fierce resistance to the Romans. The swarthy complexion of the Silures, he says, the prevalence of curly hair among them, and their position over against Spain, argue that ancient Iberians must have crossed over from Spain and occupied their territory. McNeill's second quote goes on to say, we have heard the occurrence of similar physical traits in the west of Ireland ascribed to a more recent Spanish mixture. It all amounts to this, which Irish tradition bears out, and which nobody questions, that these western islands or isles contain descendants of an ancient dark complexioned population, probably already of a mixed race, which existed in Western Europe before the arrival of the fair complexioned people. Those distinctive features appear by all indications to have originated in the lands forming the basin of the Baltic Sea. So as we can see in both of these quotes, they are remarking on the swarthy complexion of the inhabitants. Okay, let's move on to look at a couple other quotes from Eoin McNeill. As you can see at the top here, the quote says, if I am right in suggesting that the Greeks adopted from the Gauls the name Britannic Islands as a joint name for Britain and Ireland, it follows that the Gauls themselves supposed the chief population of both islands before the Celtic occupation to have been the Britanni, i.e. the Picts, during the early historical period. The Picts are chiefly known as the people of the northern mainland of Scotland, north of the Grampian Mountains. The Venerable Bede speaks of their language as still existing in his time, the early part of the 8th century, and as being distinct from the Irish and British languages. Okay, so moving on to the next paragraph, McNeill states, if then, by the name Celts, we cannot properly understand a distinct race, what are we to understand by it? By what criterion do we recognize any ancient population to have been Celts? The answer is undoubted. Every ancient people that is known to have spoken any Celtic language is said to be a Celtic people. The term Celtic is indicative of language, not of race. We give the name Celts to the Irish and the Britons because we know that the ancient language of each people is a Celtic language. Moving on to the last paragraph, there's a quote by John O'Donovan. O'Donovan, or the narrative which he quotes, says that the dispossessed king was of furblong stock. He uses the term furblong in its late and wide application. The older possessors of the territory were Picts. Moreover, they were depressed rather than dispossessed, for the descendants of the ancient rulers continued to dwell as subordinate chiefs in their old territory. The family of O'Maninin, called Manning in English, is one of those descended from the ancient Pictish rulers of this district, which comprised the southern part of the county Roscommon and the southeastern part of the county Galloway. Okay, this next section is still dealing with McNeill's book, Phases of Irish History. And the quote goes on to say, the earliest recorded expansion of the Celts from the region north of the Alps was over northern Italy, and no historian supposes or suggests that the first Celtic occupation of northern Italy was earlier than about 600 BC. This item ought to be borne in mind, for it has an important bearing on the date of the early Celtic migrations to Britain and Ireland. It was probably about the same time that they began to move westward across the Rhone, occupying the parts of France between Garonne on the south and the English Channel on the north, which parts are specifically they spread southwestward into Spain, apparently more as conquerors than as colonists. For the result of the Celtic occupation of the Spanish Peninsula Iberians, whom ancient writers distinguish from the Celts by giving them what we may call a hyphenated name, Celt Iberians. We are not to imagine from this that Celtic conquests elsewhere were of an exterminating character, or that they did not result in a fusion of peoples. The notion that the migratory conquests of antiquity resulted in the displacement of one population by another is one of the favorite illusions of popular history. So moving on to the last quote, Celtic people at one time. The older Gaelic name is Dun Calden, i.e. Dunan Caldanon, the stronghold of the Caldanons. The Celts, who naturally would have been strongest in lowland Scotland, were so weakened there, I suggest, by the Roman power, that they could no longer maintain their predominance over the Pictish population of the Highlands, and so, towards the close of the 3rd century, the Picts emerged as new and formidable adversaries of Roman Britain on its northern frontier. Okay, so moving on to history. In 851, a new variety of Norsemen arrives on the Irish coast. They are called the Black Heathens, the Black Foreigners, the Black Lachlanecks, in contradistinction to the Fair Heathens, Fair Foreigners, or Fair Lachlanecks, who had been there before them. The Welsh Chronicle, the Annals of Cambrai, makes it fairly clear that these Black Heathens were the Danes. They came in hostility to the Norwegians, with whom they fought fierce battles, and we have already seen that for a number of years the Danes held the chief power in the Hebrides. At this point of time, about the middle of the 9th century, the Norsemen must have seemed to be about to become masters of all northern Europe, from the west of Ireland to the banks of the Volga. England was crumbling under their attacks. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle tells how Norse armies marched up and down through the country, then moved off to the continent. They occupied Ghent in Flanders for a year. They defeated the Franks in battle and supplied themselves with horses from their captors, pushed up the Meuse into France, and camped there for another year. I'm not going to read this whole passage for you. You can do that yourself if you wish. I just want you to know that the Black Danes, or Norsemen, battled their way through parts of Europe into Germany, France, crossed over to England in 250 ships. Alfred, being then the King of England, afterwards they crossed England, passing up the Thames and then up to the Severn. Alfred, assisted by the Welsh, defeated them. They fell back on Essex, mustered fresh forces there, once more crossed England and laid siege to Chester, invaded Wales, and were driven out of it. Some of these Black Danes settled down in the conquered lands of East Anglia and Northumbria. The rest made fresh expedition into France. Though Alfred was a great and admirable king, and justly held up to renown in English history, he could do no more than hold a minor part of England against these invaders. And at his death in 901, they were undisputed masters of about 2/3 of that country. Okay, now we're going to move on to the Proceedings of the Royal Irish Academy, Volume 2, Polite Literature and Antiquities. Okay, so the first quote says, "Now of the two primitive Irish races, which he designates as Furblong and Celt, he has given typical figures. One of these, the Furblong cranium, will in all probability correspond with the remarkable dolichociphical skull that I have described. This long-headed, black-visaged, dark-haired, swarthy Aborigines possess skulls that are principally characterized by their extreme length from before backwards, or what is technically termed the astro-posterior diameter, and the flatness of their sides." He says, in addition, "Now we find similar conditions of heads still existing among the modern inhabitants of this country, particularly beyond the Shannon, where the darker Furblong race may still be traced as distinct from the more globular-headed, light-eyed, fair-haired Celtic people who live to the northeast of that river." Moving on to page 53, the quote says, "The most probable explanation appears to be that it was a result of one of these piratical descendants or invasions of the Irish coast made by robber Vikings, Dinars, or Black Danes, and their ferocious allies from the island of Scotland, which were so common in the 9th and 10th centuries. These invasions took place subsequent to and were altogether different from the Scandinavian settlements in Ireland of Lochlands or Azure Gentiles, who are described in the chronicles of the time by their distinctive features of being a white or fair-haired race." Okay, let's go to the last paragraph, page 54. "Of different race came the Dinar, the black or dark-haired foreigner, who fought against and plundered the fair Norsemen as fiercely as he warred with and robbed the native Irishry. But, as Dr. Todd remarks, it is to be regretted that the writers of our annals do not always clearly distinguish between them in their descriptions of their devastations in Ireland. We cannot even be sure that the name Dane is not sometimes given to the Norwegian. The word Dane in later times, a cruel or ferocious barbarian without distinction of nation." Okay, so let me now talk to you about this next piece of evidence. It's an article titled "Scientists Reveal Face of the First European." The face of the first European has been recreated from bone fragments by scientists. And this article was written by Ermi Khan, digital and media correspondent, on May 4th, 2009. And it goes on to say that the head was rebuilt in clay based on an incomplete skull and jawbone discovered in a cave in the southwest of the Carpathian Mountains in Romania by potholers. Using radiocarbon analysis, scientists say the man or woman, it is still not possible to determine the sex, lived between 34,000 and 36,000 years ago. Europe was then occupied by both Neanderthal man, who had been in the region for thousands of years, and anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens. Modern humans first arrived in Europe from Africa. The skull appears very like humans today, but it also displays more archaic traits, such as very large molar teeth, which led some scientists to speculate the skull may belong to a hybrid between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, an idea discounted by other experts. Eric Trinkus, professor of Anthropology at Washington University in Missouri, said the jaw was the oldest directly dated modern human fossil. Taken together, the material is the first that securely documents what modern humans look like when they spread into Europe, he said. The model was created by Richard Nave, a forensic artist, for a BBC program about the origins of the human race and evolution. So I want to point out and establish that this discovery places dark-complected people in Europe as far back as 36,000 years. The article also states that these people probably migrated out of Africa and populated the European landmass. So here's another source placing swarthy people in Europe. Okay, moving on to my next subject. Okay, so the next section we're going to cover in this video is an article on DNA that was done by the Natural History Museum in London. And the title of the article, as you can see, is First Modern Britons Had Dark to Black Skin, Cheddar Man DNA Analysis Reveals. The genome of Cheddar Man, who lived 10,000 years ago, suggests that he had blue eyes, dark skin, and dark curly hair. As you can see in the picture, a forensic reconstruction of Cheddar Man's head based on the new DNA evidence and his fossilized skeleton. So the article goes on to say that the first modern Britons, who lived about 10,000 years ago, had dark to black skin. A groundbreaking DNA analysis of Britain's oldest complete skeleton is revealed. The fossil known as Cheddar Man was unearthed more than a century ago in Gough's Cave in Somerset. Intense speculation has built up around Cheddar Man's origins and appearance because he lived shortly after the first settlers crossed from the continental Europe to Britain at the end of the last ice age. People of white British ancestry alive today are descendants of this population. It was initially assumed that Cheddar Man had pale skin and fair hair, but his DNA paints a different picture, strongly suggesting he had blue eyes, a very dark brown to black complexion, and dark curly hair. The discovery shows that the genes for lighter skin became widespread in Europe populations far later than originally thought, and that skin color was not always a proxy for geographic origin in the way that is often seen to be today. The results point to a Middle Eastern origin of Cheddar Man, suggesting that his ancestors would have left Africa, moved into the Middle East, and later headed west into Europe before eventually crossing the ancient land bridge called Doggerland, which connected Britain to continental Europe. Today, about 10% of white British ancestry can be linked to this ancient population. Okay, so in this next section, we're going to talk a little bit more about the original inhabitants of Europe. And this particular article was written by Haley Halpin on Thursday, February 8th, 2018, in the journal.ie. And it goes on to read that the early Irish population had dark skin, similar to Cheddar Man discovery made in the UK this week, according to experts. R.D. was born in Ireland, professor of population genetics at Trinity College Dublin. Dan Bradley did that project with the has made similar findings compiled almost 1,000 years ago that provide similar results as Cheddar Man. The earliest Irish would have been the same as Cheddar Man and would have had darker skin than we have today, Bradley said. He said their findings suggested that DNA is linked to individuals from Spain and Luxembourg, people who populated Western Europe after the last ice age, but before the farming era. Similarly, Cheddar Man's tribe migrated to Britain at the end of the last ice age, and his DNA has been linked to individuals discovered in modern-day Spain, Hungary, and Luxembourg. Of course, you can see in the picture on the right a man holding the Cheddar Man skull. I'd like to revisit a quote from Owen McNeill that I read earlier in the video, and I apologize for pronouncing his first name incorrectly. The quote is, "The notion that the migratory conquest of antiquity resulted in the displacement of one population by another is one of the favorite illusions of popular history." Basically, he's saying that when a new wave of immigrants migrates to a new land or conquers a new land, they don't totally eradicate the indigenous population. They tend to mix and blend populations. He's also saying that popular history or current historians want you to believe that all traces of older indigenous populations disappeared, so they don't have to acknowledge them and their contributions to current populations. What's interesting to me is that There is so much evidence being uncovered or rediscovered that it's prompting archaeologists and some historians to admit that there is a lot more to our history than we have been fed via our current educational system. Unfortunately, a lot of the information has been destroyed, painted over, hidden in private libraries and family holdings that make it very difficult to find. What remains to be seen is if current scientists, researchers, and educators will put away old thoughts on history and start embracing the true history of the world based on factual information that we still have today. Okay, so moving on to this next part of the video. This is an article from the Washington Post dated August 28th, 2015. And it's a quote from Benjamin Franklin in 1751. He was upset about other Europeans, especially Germans, immigrating to America at that time. So Franklin goes on to say, why should the Palatine Boers be suffered to swarm into our settlements and, by herding together, establish their language and manners to the exclusion of ours? Why should Pennsylvania, founded by the English, become a colony of aliens, who will shortly be so numerous as to Germanize us instead of our Anglifying them, and will never adopt our language or customs any more than they can acquire our complexion? So real quick, when he says can acquire our complexion, he's really saying that they were not the same complexion, obviously, which is exactly what I'm trying to tell you. Okay, so let's go on to the next paragraph, which says, which leads me to add one remark, that the number of purely black or tawny, Asia chiefly tawny, America exclusive of the newcomers wholly so, and in Europe, the Spanish a swarthy complexion, as the Germans are also, the Saxons only excepted, who, with the English, make the principal body of white people on the face of the earth. I could wish their numbers were increased, and while we are, as I may call it, scouring our planet, by clearing America of woods, and so making the side of our globe reflect a brighter light in the eyes of inhabitants in Mars or Venus, why should we, in sight of superior beings, darken its people? Why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America, where we have so fair an opportunity by excluding all blacks and tawnies of increasing the lovely white and red? But perhaps I am partial to the complexion of my country, for such kind of partiality is natural to mankind. So basically, this is one of our founding fathers, Benjamin Franklin, saying that many of the Europeans coming to America are not of the same complexion as he is. Basically, they are darker than him, and they are swarthy. Okay, so let's move on to another source, Early Man in Britain, and his place in the Tertiary period, or basically the end of the Cretaceous period. And this book was written by W. Boyd Dawkins, and you can see all his credentials. This book was published in London in 1880. Okay, so let's move on to his quotes from the book, page 323, and I believe the chapter is The Iberic Element in Spain. And he goes on to say, they have also left marks of their presence in the name of the Loire, and possibly in Britain in the obscure term Leogarians, from the intimate manner in which they are associated with the Iberians by classical writers, coupled with their agreement in small stature and swarthy complexion. It may be inferred with tolerable certainty that they were related to each other, as the Frank to the Goth or the Dane to the Norman, and that they belong to the same non-Aryan branch of the human race. It is also by no means improbable that the small swarthy Etruscans, whose empire extended to the earliest times recorded by history north of the Alps into Tyrol, and who held dominion also over Lombardy, belonged to the same non-Aryan stock, since they were conterminous and were driven away from their ancient possessions by the same invading people. Just as the Celts poured down through central France, isolating the Ligurian and the Iberians, so he poured through the passes of the Alps into Lombardy, sundering the Etruscans of Rhaetia and Norium from those of Etruria proper. In my belief, the Iberians of France and Spain, the Silures of Wales, the Ligures of southern Gaul and northern Italy, and the small dark Etruscans are to be looked upon as ethnological islands isolated by successive invasions, pointing out that if we could go deep enough in past time, we should find that the whole of Europe was inhabited solely by swarthy, non-Aryan population. Okay, moving on to the next page, 330, and it's titled Iberic Element in British Isles. The Iberic element in the present population of Britain is traceable in several areas, which offer refuge to the peoples in possessions of the country before the invasion of the English. The strong resemblance borne by the small dark Silures to the Iberians was remarked, as we have already noticed by Tacitus. At the present day, his observation applies equally to the small swarthy Welshman with long head and Iberian physique. The broad-headed dark Welshman is identical with the broad-headed dark Frenchman, and the Welsh people may be defined ethnologically as principally Celtic and Iberian, every intermediate variation between the two extremes being represented. The Silures no longer form a compact ethnological island, but are scattered and dispersed and mingled with other races, English as well as Celtic. In Scotland, the small dark Highlander, and in Ireland, the black Celts, to the west of the Shannon. So at the bottom there at the page, you can see that I've highlighted a footnote. It reads, the tall, long-headed, dark and red-haired men are probably, as Professor Huxley points out, of Scandinavian, and the tall, long-headed, fair men of Low German origin. Both these become intermingled with the older Celtic populations of Wales, Ireland, and Scotland within the historic period. So basically what Dawkins is saying is that people of different ethnicities and complexions were mixing at the time. Or as Professor Huxley points out, these different people were intermingling with one another, resulting in the populations of Wales, Ireland, and Scotland. So moving on to several other pages of the same book by Boyd Dawkins. And this quote is going to be from page 331. And it starts with, from this outline of the evidence of history and the ethnology, it will be seen that the Iberic tribes occupied an important position in Europe in ancient times and are still amply represented in the present population. When we consider the many invasions of strangers and the oscillations to and fro of different peoples, it is impossible not to realize the strange presence of the race. Through all the troubles which followed the conquest of Gaul by Caesar and of Britain by Claudius, through the terrible events which occupied the downfall of the Roman Empire, causing the Britons to be exterminated over a large part of England, and the almost total extinction of the ancient type of Roman in Italy, the Iberian lived and still is found in his ancient seats, with physique scarcely altered and offering a strong contrast to the fair-haired Celtic, Belgic, and German invaders. The Iberian race is known to the ethnologist and historian merely in fragments, sundered from each other by many invasions and settlements of the Aryan race. It is shown by the researches into caves and tombs to have been in possession of the whole of Europe north and west of the Rhine in the Neolithic age, and has been traced by Dr. Virchow into Germany and Denmark. So just to reiterate what Dawkins is saying, he's saying that the Iberian race, the swarthy Iberian race, was in possession of Europe north and west of the Rhine in the Neolithic age, and also into Germany and Denmark. Moving on to the next page, page 327, down at the bottom, I have outlined here, it says, outside the boundaries of the Aquitaine, the Iberian blood asserts itself in the swarthy small inhabitants of Brittany, in the east in Artichek, and in the south in Adi and Aregi. Moving on to the third page, page 325, Dawkins is talking about the French army and the soldiers within each one of the departments. It looks like they're broken up into three distinct departments, one being black, one being gray, one being white. And the page also shows a graph, a small graph. And from that, Dawkins goes on to say, From this, it is evident that the exemptions are nearly thrice as many in the departments noirs as in the departments blancs, and we may therefore conclude that the swarthy inhabitants of France at the present time are the shortest and the fair the tallest. The departments noirs are mainly centered in the old province of Aquitania of Augustus, in which the jet black eyes and hair and swarthy complexions of the natives strike the eye of the traveler. We may therefore conclude that these characters have been handed down by direct descent from the ancient Aquanati or Basques, with comparatively little change from the infusion of new blood since the time of the Roman. Again, please forgive my pronunciation of some of these words, but that's why I put them on the screen so you can read them for yourselves. Okay, so let's move on to another source in our video here. And this is a description of the Western Islands of Scotland by Martin Martin, published in 1703, digitized by the National Library of Scotland. And basically, he's given us an overview of the Western Islands of Scotland. And on the second page here, it says, "To His Royal Highness Prince George of Denmark, Lord High Admiral of England and Ireland, and of all Her Majesty's plantations, and General Ifimo of all Her Majesty's forces, etc." Okay, I'm not sure if I pronounced that right, but you can read it for yourself. And on the last page there on the right, it says, "Your Royal Highness, Your Highness's most humble and most obedient servant, M. Martin." Okay, so moving on to the quotes from the book, A Description of the Western Islands of Scotland by Martin Martin. We're going to go on to page 194, and I'm not going to read the whole page, but just the sections that I'm trying to bring your attention to. So it says, "The inhabitants of this isle are generally well proportioned, and their complexion is for the most part black." Okay, moving on to the next page, page 224. At the bottom there, it says, "The inhabitants of this isle are well proportioned, generally brown, and some of a black complexion." All right, moving on to the last page, page 239, down to the second paragraph, it says, "The natives here are well proportioned, being generally black of complexion and free from bodily imperfections. They speak the Irish language and wear the plaid bonnet." All right, so just so you know, because you haven't read the whole book, but I encourage you to do so, is that he's speaking of different islands in the western part of Scotland. So these islands are distinct from each other, just so you know. These are several islands spread out with separate clans on each island. Okay, so that's the source that I found. And this one's also digitized by Google, which makes it very easy to look up on the internet. This book was from the Cornell University Library, and the title of the book is The Book of Erin, second volume by W.M. Mackenzie, History and Folklore, and the Erin Society of Glasgow, Hugh Hopkins, Glasgow, 1914. So several pages from the Book of Erin that I pulled out. The first one is page 11. And again, I'm not going to read the whole page, but just the parts that I find interesting and that you may find interesting. So it's going to be down second paragraph. It says, "Later, a distinction appears between Fingal, white strangers or Norse, and Dubgal, or black strangers, the Danes." Okay, so moving on to the next page, page 58, down at the bottom there, it says, "Turn now to consider the planting of some left-hand Stuarts in Erin, royal offspring out of a legitimate line. Robert II and Robert III were both distinguished by an outside miscellaneous addition to the royal stock. Had sultanic tastes, in fact, like several of their forgetful of their parental responsibilities. For the one natural son of Robert II found a place in the new hereditary sheriffdom of Bute in Erin, which was in existence at least by 1385. And among the prerequisites of the office, this John Stuart, the dark complexioned or black, had corrigils in Erin." So just to be clear, the author is talking about the Stuart line of kings and the male heirs of that family. Okay, so now I'm going to move on to the next part of this video, which talks about Black European nobility. The Dictionary of National Biography is a standard work of reference on notable figures of British history, published from 1885, The updated Oxford Dictionary of National Biography was published on the 23rd of September 2004 in 60 volumes and online. Originally published in 1885 by editors Leslie Stephen, Sidney Lee, Christine Nichols, and the oldest edition is available online by Google. What you'll find when you read these books is that they contain descriptions of many Black, Brown, Tawny, Saguine, British, Scottish, and Irish European nobles. What I'd like you to understand as we go on is that in these books, these authors would not have mentioned complexion if it was not something that they noticed or was significantly different from other people. They would just maybe mention eye color or hair color, but they mentioned both eye, hair color, and complexion because there was a difference. These nobles were of a different complexion.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to swarthy European nobility. Anne of Bohemia. Both these passages come from the Dictionary of National Biography, Volume 1, pages 420 and 428. The first passage on the right-hand side reads, Anne of Bohemia, born in 1366 and died in 1394, first queen of Richard II, was the eldest daughter of Emperor Charles VI by his fourth wife, Elizabeth of Pomerania. She was born in Prague on the 11th of May, 1366. Her father was the son of that blind king, John of Bohemia, who was killed at the Battle of Crécy, and is king of Bohemia himself, as well as emperor. The second passage I'm going to read to you is from page 428 of the same book. What I've done is highlighted and zoomed in on the section that I want you to pay attention to. And that section reads, of her personal beauty, the opinion of the time was not altogether unanimous. Madame Anne, says one writer, is not one of the handsomest women in the world. She is of middle stature, swarthy complexion, long neck, wide mouth, bosom not much raised, and in fact has nothing but the king's great appetite, and her eyes, which are black and beautiful. But besides her eyes, her long flowing hair, which she allowed to fall down her shoulders, thick set with jewels, commanded general admiration. I've also placed a picture of what Anne of Bohemia looks like according to Google Images and many other pictures, which is a false representation because of Anne's skin, her face in particular, her complexion was swarthy. That is not what she would have looked like.
Okay, so moving on to more swarthy European nobility. Let me tell you about Thomas Butler, Earl of Ormond, born 1532 to 1614. Butler Thomas, 10th Earl of Ormond, born in 1532, was son and heir of James Butler, 9th Earl, who died of poison at Elm House, London, 28th October, 1546. His mother was Lady Joan Fitzgerald, heiress of James, 11th Earl of Desmond. His grandfather was Sir Pierce Butler, 8th Earl of Ormond. Thomas, who was called from his dark complexion the Black Earl, succeeded his father in the earldom and estates at the age of 14. Okay, so I will let you read the rest of that paragraph if you'd like, but I'm going to move on now and tell you a little bit more about what I think about Thomas Butler. Now, when you Google Thomas Butler, Earl of Ormond, this is the painting that you get. Does this look like someone with a swarthy complexion? I know there were many brown and dark brown Europeans walking around in these times, but notice that the author says Thomas, who was called from his dark complexion, Black Earl. I'm not a genius, but if someone goes as far as to call someone Black Earl because of his complexion, then he must have been exceptionally dark-skinned, more so than most of his siblings or other relatives. Let me also reiterate this point. If Thomas Butler was that dark-complected, then it goes to follow that either his mother, his father, or both were fairly dark-complected themselves. Also, the author does not say that Thomas was called Black Earl because of his hair color or eye color. It was due to his complexion. I'm saying this because often you will read modern explanations on the internet stating, oh, he or she was called black this or that because of their hair or eye color or both. And that is simply not the case. It is just hard for some to understand that geographic locations change hands by migrations of populations from different regions, much like the United States of America. If, for example, you were born in recent times, you may think that the original Americans were light-complected people. You would think that just because fair or light-complected people have been the majority in the U.S. for probably the last 125 to 150 years, that it was also the case. Also, because our history books mostly only cover back to when the colonies were established, so for most Americans that get a basic education, that is what they are exposed to. Well, if that was your assumption, you would be totally wrong. Anyway, hopefully you understand the general premise of what I'm saying. All right, well, let's move on to my next subject. Okay, so let's move on to this next section of the video where we'll be talking about Lord Thomas Fairfax, 3rd Lord of Fairfax, born in 1612, died in 1671. Again, this is from the Dictionary of National Biography, page 148. Now, I've copied the page from the book, page 148, and you can see the top there, it says Fairfax. And on the right-hand side, I've outlined it in red, and I've blown it up, zoomed in on it just next to that, so you can see the arrow pointing to it. And I'll read from that little passage there. It says, according to the same authority, the best portrait of Fairfax is a miniature by Hoskins, painted about 1650. In complexion, he was so dark that, like Strafford, he was nicknamed Black Tom. Okay, so looking at the right-hand side at these images, both of these images are from Google, and the majority of images I found look like the image on the top there. The one below it is an engraving from the National Portrait Gallery. Both images don't quite represent the description in the book that I read, although the one on the bottom is definitely a little closer. What do you think? Also, I'd like you to realize that the engraving on the bottom there was done in 1757, and realizing that Lord Fairfax passed away and died in 1671. So really it was about 86 years later that they completed the engraving. I'm not sure exactly when the painting on top was completed, but it was probably done after the engraving. Just keep in mind what the word complexion means as we continue to go forward in this video. Also, before I move on to the next section of the video, please keep in mind the name Strafford, because I mentioned it there. It says in complexion, he was so dark that, like Strafford, he was. Okay, so let's move on to Scottish nobility. And we're going to talk about the Douglas family here. In particular, Sir James Douglas of Douglas, Scotland, Lord of Douglas the Good. He was born in 1286 and he died in 1330. Was the eldest son of Sir William Douglas of Douglas, the Hardy, by his first wife, Elizabeth Stuart. For Barbour calls James High Steward of Scotland, his heir or uncle. He was dreaded throughout the north of England. He was called the Black Douglas for his complexion. And that was from page 302 from the Dictionary of National Biography, volume 15. You can also see that passage I just read there on the right-hand side. I have an arrow pointing to it. And again, that's from page 302 if you want to go find it. Okay, so moving on to the second part, Sir William Douglas, Lord of Nithsdale, Scotland. He was born in 1370, died in 1391. Was the illegitimate son of Archibald, 3rd Earl of Douglas himself, the illegitimate son of the good Sir James. For comeliness and bravery, he was a worthy descendant of such ancestors, and the historians of the period described him as inheriting several of the personal features of his grandfather, being large-boned, of great strength, tall and erect, bearing himself with a majestic man, yet courteous and affable, and in company even hearty and merry. He inherited the swarthy complexion of the good Sir James and was also called the Black Douglas. And he was an active warrior against the English. And that's from page 360, again from the Dictionary of National Biography, volume 15. And again, I'll direct you to the right-hand side of the page where I have another arrow pointing to the section that I just read. Again, I'd like you to keep in mind what the word complexion means and what the word black means. Okay, so let's move on to our next subject, Agnes Dunbar, Countess of Dunbar and March, born approximately 1312 and died in 1369. Agnes was the daughter of Randolph, Earl of Moray, and Isabel, her mother. Isabel, her mother, was the only daughter of John Stuart of Bunkill. And Agnes was married to Patrick Dunbar, 10th Earl of Dunbar and March. If you look over to the right, you can see the page out of the Dictionary of National Biography, volume 16, page 150. I have zoomed in on the section I'd like you to pay attention to, and it reads, Dunbar, Agnes, Countess of Dunbar and March, born 1312 to 1369, known from her swarthy complexion as Black Agnes, is celebrated for her spirited defense of Dunbar Castle in 1337 and for her swarthy complexion as Black Agnes. Now, hearing that, I must assume that she stood out because of her complexion. Not that there weren't other people of swarthy complexions, but she must have really stood out to be nicknamed Black Agnes. So I'd like you to look over to the left side and look at the picture that historicuk.com has for Black Agnes. Maybe it's just me, and yes, I'm being sarcastic, but this person in this painting does not look like she has a swarthy complexion at all. So again, we can see that the words that are written are definitely in stark contrast to the paintings that are being represented to us. Okay, so our next subject is related to King Charles Stuart II, Black Boy King, and how he relates to this Black Boy Inn, or just Black Boy, located in the royal town of Carnarvon in Gwynedd, Wales, is a hotel and public house which is thought to have dated back to 1522, making it one of the oldest surviving inns in North Wales. It is within the medieval walls of Carnarvon, a few hundred yards from Carnarvon Castle. I'd like to draw your attention to the sign that they have posted outside of the inn, the Tafarny Black Boy Inn. And you can see an actual Black Boy pictured on the sign. And apparently it's been like that forever. Then as you look over to the right-hand side there, you can see Charles II as a child. It's from Google Images, of course, and Charles was born in 1630 and died in 1685. Then further on the right-hand side, you can see his mother, Henrietta Maria of France, Queen of England, and she nicknamed her son Black Boy. And so this is the painting, or one of the paintings that Google Images has of his mother, Henrietta Maria. And then on the bottom there is his father, King Charles Stuart I, and that is what Google Images has for him, or at least one of the pictures or paintings they have of him. So I wrote a little caption there below the Black Boy Inn sign. It says, "Why would Charles II's mother nickname him Black Boy? And why would the pub use the effigy of a black boy if he looked white?" That makes no sense at all. What does make sense is that Charles II was swarthy. Also, if he was swarthy, then you guessed it, mother, father, or both were swarthy. And again, let me just say, why would a mother nickname her son Black Boy if he wasn't actually a black boy? Some would say, well, he had dark hair, dark eyes, and dark eyebrows. That still, I don't think, would qualify someone's mother calling them Black Boy if they weren't actually a black boy. And there's nothing wrong with being a black boy, but this doesn't make sense. And there were tons of boys running around with dark hair, dark eyes, and dark eyebrows that were white, and they weren't called black boys, so it doesn't make any sense. Okay, so in this next section, we're going to again talk about King Charles Stuart II, Black Boy King. King Charles II, born 1630, died 1685, was monarch of the three kingdoms of England, Scotland, and Ireland. King Charles's father, King Charles I, was executed at Whitehall on the 30th of January, 1649, at the climax of the English Civil War. Even though Scotland considered Charles II King of Great Britain in 1649, the English Parliament passed a statute declaring England a de facto republic. In 1651, Charles fled to mainland Europe, and Oliver Cromwell became the virtual dictator of England, Scotland, and Ireland. Charles spent the next 9 years in France. A political crisis that followed the death of Oliver Cromwell in 1658 resulted in the restoration of the monarchy, and Charles was invited to return to Britain. So you can see here in red, I have several passages that I've highlighted, and I have arrows pointing to. The first one is, Charles was described as of a tall stature and sable hue. And you can see my arrow pointed to that section. And the next one says, Cunningham 74 states him to have measured 5 feet 10 inches only. And he goes on to write, the king's swarthy complexion, with its effect heightened by the dark periwig, is the most distinctive feature of all his portraits. You know, that, folks, is very interesting. And by the way, this information is coming from the Dictionary of National Biography, published in 1887, volume 10, page 106. I'd like you to take a look at that first arrow there where I read of a tall stature and of sable hue. And just as the definition of sable, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, it means a dark brown or black color. And just so you know what the definition for hue is, I know most of you do, just in case, it's defined as a color or the particular degree of light or dark of a color. And I'd like to reiterate a few things. The first one is Cunningham states that the king's swarthy complexion is the most distinctive feature of all his portraits. Notice he said of all his portraits. Okay, and then he goes on to list three in particular at the National Portrait Gallery. I have seen quite a few of his portraits, although not in person. None of them, however, come close to looking like he is swarthy, has a sable hue, or like someone who their mother would nickname them Black Boy. As you can see, I attached the three paintings that Cunningham mentions back in the year of 1660. None of them remotely show Charles II as swarthy. Now, for transparency reasons, the painting with the name Sir Peter Lely underneath it, it was done by him. However, I'm not 100% sure this is the one Cunningham is referring to. I did see the other paintings by him. Okay, so this is the last section where I'm going to talk about Charles Stuart II, Black Boy King. Let's go down to Francois Breton de Motteville, French memoir writer, 1621 to 1689. Again, folks, I know that my pronunciation is horrible, but please bear with me and realize that the content is what's important here. And here she writes, in appearance, Madame de Motteville describes Charles at this time as very well made. His swarthy complexion agreed well with his large bright eyes. His mouth was exceedingly ugly, his figure extremely fine. He was very tall for his age and carried himself with grace and dignity. His natural tendency to wit and repartee was not noticed, for at that time he hesitated and even stammered, a deficit observed in his father and still worse in his uncle Louis XIII. This first section I just read was from Charles II and his court in 1910 by ACA Brett, page 23, and it was digitized by Google. Okay, so this next paragraph is Anne-Marie Louise d'Orleans, Duchess of Montpensier, 1627 to 1693. Millie de Montpensier, daughter of Gaston, Duc d'Orleans, and cousin of Louis XIV, was selected by Henrietta Maria as a fitting wife for Prince Charles. And while objecting to the match and to Henrietta's methods, the lady condescends to say of her royal suitor, he is tall for his age, with a beautiful head, black hair, a swarthy complexion, and a tolerable figure. This was also from Charles II and his court, published 1910 by ACA Brett, page 24. And so on to the last section, under the heading Notes, you'll see line 1 and what follows equals Charles II as a parallel passage and as showing the kingly state of James compared with that of Charles. I quote from Popish Politics Unmasked, written probably between 1679 and 1681, judging from the Duke saying, going down to the section that says, the portrait is as follows. This person was a very tall black man, above the common size, almost a span. His face was wasted in most piteous sort. In all things else he was of royal port. But if grim looks alone majestio be, commend me to that face for majesty. For such it had enough for 2 or 3. To this tall man joined instantly another of near his stature, whom he'd call his brother, richly encircled with a numerous ring, which showed he wanted naught but name of king. Okay, so I'm not going to read the rest of that, but I will tell you that this was from the complete works in verse and prose of Andrew Morell, 1872, page 350, digitized by Google. Again, on the right there, you can see I've added 2 paintings of what's supposed to be Charles Stuart II, Black Boy King, copied from Google Images. But what is so readily apparent is that obviously he doesn't look like a tall black man and his complexion is definitely not swarthy. Okay, so let's move on to our next subject, and that would be Lord John Methuen. John Methuen was born 1650 and died in 1706. He was Lord Chancellor of Ireland, was the eldest son of Paul Methuen of Bradford, Wiltshire, clothier, by his wife Grace, daughter of John Ashe of Freshford, Somerset. Paul Methuen, eldest son of Anthony Methuen, or Methuen, vicar of Frome, by Jean, daughter of Thomas Taylor of Bristol, settled in Bradford between 1620 and 1630, was a staunch Whig. He was described by Mackey as a man of intrigue, but very muddy in his conceptions, and not quickly understood in anything. In high complexion and manners, much of a Spaniard, a tall black man. That quote in red there was from the Memoirs of the Secret Services of John Mackey, 1733, page 143. His remains were subsequently brought to England and were buried on September 17th, 1708, in Westminster Abbey, where there is a memorial to him and his son Paul by Risebrough. And this was all from the Dictionary of National Biography, volume 37, page 310. And again, you can see the page that I got the information from there on the right, but also I enlarged it and put it there in the middle. And I have an arrow pointing to the part that I want you to pay attention to. And also, again, look at the painting that I have there from Google. This is supposed to be John Methuen, but as you can tell from John Mackey's description, he's described as a tall black man. And so the painting that we're looking at definitely does not look like a tall black man. And again, we have a stark contradiction of what is written and what is provided to us visually. All right, so this next subject that we're going to look into is Major General O'Neill. O'Neill Hugh, born 1642, died 1660, Major General, born in the Spanish Netherlands, was son of Art Oge, who was the elder brother of Owen Rowan O'Neill and nephew of Hugh O'Neill, the great Earl of Tyrone. He was a major Irish commander against the parliamentary forces of Oliver Cromwell. Hugh gained distinction as an officer in the army of Spain and accompanied Owen O'Neill in 1642 to Ireland, where from his father he was known as MacArt and styled in Irish beard or swarthy from his complexion. And I read you that from the Dictionary of National Biography, volume 42, page 197. And if you look below that, you can see the caption where I said, unable to locate a picture of Major General O'Neill. And trust me, folks, I tried on Google, but I could not find one. I did find some other O'Neills, but not Hugh O'Neill, or Black Hugh as they called him. If you look at the top right with the heading O'Neill, page 197, you can see where I got the actual quote from the Dictionary of National Biography. But if you look below that, you can see there I have a passage from the Journal of the Royal Historical and Archaeological Association of Ireland, volume 6, page 24, published in 1884. And the reason I'm showing you that section of that journal, page 24, is because it really highlights the fact that General O'Neill's father was Art Oge, and he came from a family of swarthy men, as you can see there in that passage, further reinforcing the fact that Major General O'Neill was a person with a swarthy complexion. Also further reinforcing the fact that if someone is swarthy, then one of their parents or both their parents are swarthy, and they come from a swarthy family. Okay, so let's move on to another subject. This person is Bishop Samuel Horsley. Bishop Samuel Horsley was born 1733, died 1806, son of John Horsley, principal of Edinburgh University. Description of him at age 17, his eyes and complexion dark as a raven. And that was from the Dictionary of National Biography, volume 8, page 383. And you can see that I highlighted that section on the page and I zoomed in on it. So you can see that in the middle there, pointing to the quote. And we can see from this copy of this painting that I got from Wikipedia, which is supposed to be Bishop Sam Horsley, is definitely not as dark complexioned as a raven. A raven is dark black. And obviously, this is not someone that has a dark black complexion. All right, so moving on to Thurlow Edward, 1st Baron of Thurlow, born 1731, died 1806, Lord Chancellor, eldest son of the Reverend Thomas Thurlow, incumbent successively of Little Ashfield, Suffolk, and of Thurston, Long Stratton, and Knapton, Norfolk, by Elizabeth, daughter of Robert Smith, a descendant of Sir Richard Hovell, Esquire of the body of Henry V. Thurlow was a tall, well-built, and singularly majestic in appearance. His features, though stern, were regular, and a swarthy complexion matched well with his keen black sparkling eyes and brushy eyebrows. And I'm reading you this from the Dictionary of National Biography, volume 56, page 348. And you can see that page 348 on the right-hand side. I've placed that red square around that section, and I have an arrow pointing to the section that I've zoomed in on so you can see it clearly. And here again, folks, obviously the words do not match the paintings that are provided to us. And I know I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but there's a definite pattern here. Okay, so here's another piece of evidence. We have the Earl of Middleton, Scotland. Earl of Middleton, Charles II Earl of Middleton and titular Earl of Monmouth, 1640 to 1719, Secretary of State to James II, born about 1640, was the eldest son of John, 1st Earl of Middleton, by his wife Grisel, daughter of Sir James Durham of Pitcairn, and widow first of Sir Alexander Frotheringham of Ballandrone, and secondly of Sir Gilbert Ramsay of Balmain. Mackey describes Middleton as a black man of a middle stature with a sanguine complexion. And remember in the beginning of the video, I showed you that complexion chart. Well, sanguine is the reddish brown complexion. If you look over to the right side of the page, page 340 under Middleton, you can see the area where I drew the red box, and then you can look over to the arrow where I have zoomed in on that passage. Again here, if you look at the painting that I got from Google, that is definitely not a black man with a sanguine complexion. Okay, so I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here, but I have one more person to show you from the book Dictionary of National Biography. Okay, so this is the 4th Earl of Perth, James Drummond, 4th Earl and 1st titular Duke of Perth, 1648 to 1716, was elder son of James, 3rd Earl, prisoner at the Battle of Philippa, 13th of September, 1645, who died the 2nd of June, 1675. His mother, who died January 1656, was Lady Anne Gordon, eldest daughter of George, 2nd Marquis of Huntly. He died at St. Germain on the 11th of March, 1716, and was buried in the chapel of the Scotch College at Paris. He is described as a very proud, of middle stature, with a quick look and a brown complexion, and is telling a story very prettily by his third wife, who died in 1726. He had 3 children, and this is from the Dictionary of National Biography, volume 16, page 31. And you can see over there on the right-hand side that I've again placed a red circle and an arrow pointing to the section that is zoomed in on, so you can see exactly where the quote came from. And again, let's look at the painting that I got from Google Images, and you can see that this person definitely does not have a brown complexion. Okay, so let's move on to our next subject here, and that would be the Duke of Kingston. Evelyn Pierrepont, 1st Duke of Kingston, born 1665, died 1726, was the 3rd son of Robert Pierrepont of Thoresby, Nottinghamshire, by his wife Elizabeth, daughter and co-heiress of Sir John Evelyn of Westdean, Wiltshire. As you can see there on the right-hand side, I took a small passage out of the book and copied it. Then I typed it over there on the left. So it reads, Kingston, who was one of the most important leaders of the fashionable world of his day, is thus described by Mackey in 1705. He hath a very good estate, is a very fine gentleman, of good sense, well-bred, and a lover of ladies, entirely in the interest of his country. Makes a good figure, is of a black complexion, well made, not 40 years. And that, of course, is from the Dictionary of National Biography, volume 45, page 263. Now go ahead and look at the picture that I have there copied from Google. And this person, of course, is supposed to have a black complexion, and I don't think they do. Again, I'm being facetious. Now, I could continue to go on and on with descriptions of people in the Dictionary of National Biography with black complexions, but I'd like to move on to a new source so that you realize it's not just one book. There are so many books and sources and pieces of evidence to investigate. So I hope you're still hanging in there with me as we move on to this new book that I think you will find equally as interesting. Let's move on to the subject of family crests. These crests sit atop of coats of arms, like the one you're seeing here for the Andrews family. These are some of the names associated with these family crests that you are currently viewing. These family crests are clearly swarthy, black or brown complected people. The crests I will be showing you are just a small sample. However, there are many more. Look at some of the names associated with these crests. Buller, Moore, Morgan, Biggs, Dobson, Haynes, Morrison, Pearson, Andrews, Halliburton, etc. Are you starting to see the correlation? These are just some of the Black, British, and Irish families that have been forgotten or written out of current history. I'm showing you textual and visual evidence of not only Black Europeans, but Black European royalty. As a side note, in future videos, I will tell you why I think this information is no longer taught or discussed. All right, so let's move on to the second part of this subject. As you can see here on the right, I'm showing you a family crest and coat of arms with a swarthy family crest of the Ogg family. I have also listed several names associated with these family crests: Lindsay, Bauer, Leader, Andrews, Goslin, McClellan, Norton, Seymour, Sterling, Eddington, Pennell, Christie, Gordon. Some of these names may be familiar to you. I know that I hear many of these names today associated with swarthy and non-swarthy people. So, would you say that these are so-called white people's names? Or is there a lot more to our history than we know today? Now, I know if you Google these family crests, you will see explanations of why these swarthy Black people appear on top of so-called white people's families' coats of arms. You will read that these were Moorish people that were defeated in the Crusades. But you have to ask yourself, there are a lot of symbols you can put on your coat of arms. Why did these families decide to represent their families with swarthy people that were their enemies that they had killed? Why didn't the other hundreds of families with crests do the same? There are quite a few families that have white-looking people as their crests. The explanation changes to it represents honor. However, that seems to me like a double standard. Also, when you look up what crests meant to represent, they were created to represent their families. Hundreds of these families used the symbols of swords, daggers, maces, animals, sea serpents, etc. I believe that the families used crests to represent themselves as strong and powerful. When you look at these crests, the swarthy people are drawn as confident and proud, some even having a semi-smile. That is not how someone will represent a defeated enemy. Some are clearly women. I have to ask myself, are you using your family crest to represent the women you killed in battle? I don't think so. That doesn't really make sense. Also, chivalry was in full swing back then. As you can see, some of the crests also show swarthy people wearing crowns, or they are set inside a crown. Is that how you would represent your enemies? You know what? That also doesn't make sense. Okay, so hold on to your horses, everyone, because I have a lot more to show you. And I hope by this point, I'm at least piquing your interests.
In this section of the video, I'm going to be talking about the book, The Scottish Nation, or The Surnames, Families, Literature, Honors, and Biographical History of the People of Scotland by William Anderson, Volume 2. And this was published in London in 1878. I added a screenshot of the title page with the picture there. You can see that. This book is very interesting. Definitely check it out. So I've enlarged the section that I wanted to read to you from the page on the left-hand side. And it goes on to read, Duff, a surname adopted by the Celtic, in which language the word means black. Sibbald, in his history of Fife, says that as Niger and Rufus were names of the families amongst the Romans, from the color and complexion of men, so it seems Duff was from the swarthy and black color of those of the tribe, or Clan Macduff. It is the family name of the Earl of Fife, in the peerage of Ireland, descended from that Duncan Macduff, Thane of Fife, who overthrew Macbeth and gave such effectual aid to Malcolm Cranmore in obtaining possession of the throne. See Fife, Earl of, and Macduff. Basically, Anderson is saying that the Clan Macduff is of a black complexion. Also, the word Duff in Gaelic means black, dark, or dark-skinned. Okay, so in this section, I was going to cover
volumes 1 and 2 of The Scottish Nation and the Surnames, Families, Literature, Honors, and Biographical History of the People of Scotland by William Anderson, volumes 1 and 2. I have so much more information regarding swarthy persons of Scottish descent. However, this video is quite long already. So what I'm going to do is produce a video containing nothing but swarthy Scottish people. Please look for it to become available soon. Well, many of you will be familiar with Queen Charlotte Sophia of Mecklenburg. She was born in 1744 and died in 1818. She's been in the news quite recently in 2018, 2019, due to the marriage between Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. It seems quite comical now to me because people made such a fuss about Meghan Markle being a person of color married into the royal family. And now you have proof that that is not true. Europeans were originally of a dark complexion, and not just the common Europeans, but Europeans of noble birth. Okay, so getting back to Charlotte, she was the 8th child of the Prince of Moreau, Germany, Charles Louis Frederick, and his wife, Elizabeth Albertina of Saxe-Hildburghausen. In 1752, she was 8 years old. Sophia Charlotte's father died. As Princess of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, Sophia Charlotte was descended directly from an African branch of the Portuguese royal house, Margareta de Castro y Sousa. 6 different lines can be traced from Princess Sophia Charlotte back to Margarita de Castro y Sousa. She married George III of England on September 8th, 1761, at the Chapel Royal in St. James Palace, London, at the age of 17 years, becoming the Queen of England and Ireland. This passage was from www.aaregistry.org. If you look down on the left-hand side at the bottom there, you'll see a portrait of Queen Charlotte by Alan Ramsay, Duke of Cambridge collection. Then if you look towards the middle, you'll see another painting of Charlotte Sophia of Mecklenburg, Queen of Britain, grandmother of Queen Victoria. And then if you look at the top right, you will see a portrait of Queen Charlotte Sophia by Alan Ramsay, circa 1770, Oxford College. All of these paintings are pretty telling in the fact that Charlotte looks like a person that has African descent in them. What's funny is that I'm saying she looks like a person with African descent, although we know that many Europeans at the time and before that time looked like they may have had African descent when they were actually European in descent. Okay, so let's take a look at this pivotal character in European history. And this has to do with the beginning of the destruction of Black Europe. Based on historical writings, there is little doubt that Thomas Cromwell and his cronies were responsible for much of the destruction of the existence of Black, British, Scottish, and Irish nobility, as well as common folks. The greatest example of this occurred in England in the late 1500s and early 1600s. Thomas Cromwell, 1st Earl of Essex, 1485 to 1540, was an English lawyer and statesman who served as chief minister to King Henry VIII of England from 1532 to 1540. Cromwell was a ruffian, in his own words, turned sectarian extremist, often painted as the king's enforcer. His record for murder, looting, and destruction is undisputed. No one can be sure of the exact figure, but it is estimated that the destruction started and legalized by Cromwell amounted to 97% of the English art then in existence. Statues were hacked down, frescoes were smashed to bits, mosaics were pulverized, illuminated manuscripts were shredded, wood carvings were burned, precious metalwork was melted down, shrines were reduced to rubble. This vandalism went way beyond a religious reform. It was a frenzy, obliterating the artistic patrimony of centuries of indigenous craftsmanship with the intensity of hatred for imagery and depicting the divine that has strong and resonant parallels today. This passage was taken from an article written in the telegraph.co.uk by Dominic Selwood, 22nd of January, 2015. So I know many of you are internally asking yourselves, why isn't there more proof of Black Europe in England or Great Britain, Ireland, and Scotland? Well, the main reason is this person, Thomas Cromwell, and I'm going to do an in-depth video revealing all the destruction, carnage, and displacement that he caused. So let's go ahead and look at some other pieces of evidence that show swarthy Europeans. On the left-hand side, you can see a coin there which is Edward VI on a silver sixpence. There were at least 4 different coins issued during the brief 6-year reign of Edward VI. His early coins continued to be debased like those of his father, Henry VIII, but later the finesse was restored. Our featured coin is a sixpence from the last issue with a facing portrait. The ton mint mark tells us this was struck in London, charred gold Britannia bullion coins, Lancaster, England. And I obtained this from Pinterest.com. Now, if you look at the top right of the page, you'll see a penny, copper penny, with a male figure wearing a crown with some plumage. And to me, he looks like a person that may have a swarthy complexion. And there on the flip side of the coin, it has the inscription Barbados penny, 1792, and you'll see a male figure riding some kind of seaworthy chariot being pulled by horses, holding a trident and wearing a crown. And I've written there underneath, Queen Victoria, House of Hanover, Alexandrina Victoria, 24th of May, 1819 to 1822, January 1901, was the monarch of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland from 20th of June, 1837 until her death. Her paternal grandfather was King George III, the last Black king of England. The crown he wore was passed down to his granddaughter. And Victoria Island in Lagos, Nigeria is named after her. You also notice a crown there in the picture, and underneath the caption says, the regal circlet crown of Queen Victoria, 1819 to 1901, very similar to the regal crown worn by King George III on the Barbados penny. From what I can perceive, I think the only real difference is the plumage that is worn on the crown of King George III. So I'm sure you're asking yourself, why is it that this penny is in Barbados and there are no pennies like it in Great Britain, Ireland, or Scotland? The only thing I can think of right now with the information I have is that I'm sure many of them were destroyed or hidden, probably directly after his death in 1820. So why is there still this penny in Barbados or wherever it was discovered? I think people generally want to hold on to things that are of value to them. I do think that there are more of these pennies and other coins depicting George III and other swarthy people of nobility, like Edward VI. But in revealing those coins, those collectors would be revealing the true history of Europe, which for some is a very bitter pill to swallow. Anyway, I will be discussing these issues later on in future videos. Okay, folks, so I'm going to throw a couple curveballs at you here. Let's talk about Alexander Graham Bell. Alexander Graham Bell was born on March 3rd, 1847 in Edinburgh, Scotland, the second son of Alexander Melville Bell and Elise Grace Summons Bell. He was named for his paternal grandfather. Okay, now I'm going to read a letter by Alexander Graham Bell to his mother from May 10th, 1878, and it says, "Dear Mama, our little baby has last come into the world. Unlike its papa and mama, punctual and on time to the minute. On Wednesday morning before daylight, she began to rebel against the restraints of an irksome confinement, and at 7:15 in the evening, she popped into this world as lusty as stout as ever demonstrated the possession of a healthy pair of lungs. Such a funny black little thing it is, perfectly formed with a full crop of dark hair, bluish eyes, and a complexion so swarthy that Mabel declares she has given birth to a red Indian." This letter can be found at the Library of Congress online at https://www.loc.gov. The question I asked myself after reading this letter is, why didn't Alexander Graham Bell feel like something was wrong? He called his baby a funny black little thing with a swarthy complexion. To me, it's obvious that this was nothing new to Alexander Graham Bell and his family. What is also apparent here is that Alexander Graham Bell, his wife, or both of them were swarthy. Also, another indication that his baby being swarthy and black is not an issue because he doesn't go on explaining to his mother how it is that his baby is dark and swarthy. Now, lastly, the picture that I have here depicted from biography.com may not be the true complexion of Alexander Graham Bell. Again, now we have a case where the words that are written are not reflecting what is given to us in the portraits and paintings. All right, then, here's another curveball coming at you, folks. William Shakespeare, 1564 to 1616. I know everyone has heard of William Shakespeare, English poet, playwright, widely regarded as the greatest writer in the English language. Well, most people don't. Shakespeare died in 1616 and was buried in his local church, Holy Trinity. And it was still alive, so it is generally thought that it was a good likeness of the poet. I say this because his wife attended the church, and if she looked up at Shakespeare's monument and saw that he had swarthy skin, she and her son-in-law would have protested profusely if it didn't resemble Shakespeare's likeness, and in particular, his complexion. Isn't it unusual that we don't normally see this likeness of him, being that it would most resemble him because it was done and commissioned by his brother-in-law and observed by his wife on every single day that she attended the church? Okay, so back to the last paragraph that I wrote there. If you look at Shakespeare's collar, wrists, paper, and quill, you will notice they are all white. If you observe his complexion, he is dark brown. One modern reason for the appearance of his dark skin is that it changed color as the statue aged. Well, if that were true, his collar, wrist cuffs, paper, and quill would have darkened as well. But as you can see, they are perfectly white, in stark contrast to his face and hands, which are very swarthy. Lastly, let's take a look at the two images I have of Shakespeare, which are very typical of images found on Google and many of the books that Shakespeare is featured on. Okay, so we've come to the end of this video. I hope I've passed on some valuable knowledge to you. Also, I hope I've provoked some serious thoughts as to who the original British, Scottish, and Irish people were. And please understand, this is my
So I have Chopper. Hello, General Mosquito. How are you doing? He says, hey, hey Maria and Seto, how are you doing? Today we are doing fine, General Mosquito. Long time without no see. Without no see. General Mosquito. Sound is bad. That is from General Mosquito. The sound is bad. Like we sound bad.
Yeah, money.
General Mosquito said that said that was my great granddad. He was General Mosquito the third. I didn't get you there, General Mosquito. Yeah, but actually, the video that we have been sharing here, it actually continues to show however much black people they are trying to actually to erase history of black people from books. There are a lot of things in history that show the presence of black people. However much most of the things are not taught in school, but due to the fact that these things existed, it is very hard to just erase them in books. And of course, we cannot see anything. You know, the mosquito says, "What are your thoughts on the video?"
Should I write around the to
The mosquito says that interesting bit of European guy. Like when we look at actually the entire history of the world, however much black people are not actually considered to be actually, we are not put on the front, or we are not actually recognized worldwide, but we have a touch in the history of the world. We can't avoid. At the times we are here, and Keith is like, there are black people in Japan, there are black people that founded China, there are black people in China, there are black people. It's like black people are everywhere. Setu, that was GB Jabba asking about your thoughts on the video. Yeah, true. So that's why I'm talking. um, we can't erase actually black. We can't erase black people in history. And actually, this guy in the video actually he tried to at the beginning of the video he was actually yeah like he was actually trying to explain the different complexions of the skin color which again like katusubiri you know like actually who are the whites
No.
eh?
Sentimental.
Sentiment,
Oh, that's it. I don't know because I cannot. When we are in Africa, we study that whites are people who come from Europe.
mhm,
In school, there are
mhm,
people of European origin. That is in school. But again, the real history tells you that
mhm,
before when those very people were there, black people existed in those places.
mhm,
So which leaves their identity a little bit confusing because they'll give you different scholars who describe them differently to the point that others will say they're Neanderthals and other people will say they are the cave people. Though when we are learning history in Africa, it is changed to believe that the Africans were the early cave people. Um, but if at all you ask, according to the Africa's education system, they'll say the white people are those people who originate from Europe,
mhm.
right? From Europe. So, ndoganira muri ngamira rutaro nze bijego banyuze biki.
So big deal of being so quick.
So anyway, black people existed apparently everywhere in the world, and this is when you're describing Africans or black people, they have a description. At least we know that we have Africans, they originated from Africa and nobody else originated there. All right. So, but when we look at the history, even the same story comes to America. You know, America are not regarded as white people
Mhm,
when it comes to how they describe, okay? Because America was created with different kinds of people, and I guess this is why we still see a lot of struggle in this America. We call it, for example, a no man's land. Though we had other people who existed in America who claimed they are the originals. We have got the Indians who were there and they said they were the original people. We have got the Africans who were, of course, travelers, business people who also said we discovered this. So we have apparently there is a lot that has been hidden. There is a lot that has been hidden, and when it comes to Africa, I know a pot of Ugandan coffee. Why? I don't know, but I don't say
mhm.
are you sure? There is a lot to learn about Africa, and we always talk about these things. If at all black people knew the truth, the power they hold, if they knew their diverseness, if they knew their greatness, I think it would be one of the steps to empower them all over the world. Unfortunately, and now we look at like the Black Madonna. A lot of people have mixed feelings about Black Madonna. Uh, 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 all right, some other people will say it is just that by the time they made that picture, it was white. It took time because of the duration. It turned black I know, of course, Black Madonna is the Virgin Mary of the Catholic Church. That's come.
Very interesting.
Oh,
You're learning well. You must be trying to Maria, the term Indian was a title describing black people, just like more or nigger
yeah, man.
in the black.
So like, so a lot of people got so, but we have seen. Oh my God.
Mhm. The white Pope plays to the black Madonna in his bedroom. So actually, I don't know why actually most of this history is not actually found in schools. It's not taught in schools. There is no Muslim who can teach in their schools uh, how the black people actually existed in Europe before then. There is no way they will tell, actually they will bring out such of course information that is actually that links everything to the black people, because they know once people get to know, they will understand the strength of which the black people hold. It will make black people aware of what they hold. It will make black people actually turn to be, of course, to understand the strength they hold in the world,
Mm.
despite of the media that of course that scraps everything from the eye of everyone to know about this. Jibijaba continue to say is that Philippines, they have a Black Nazareth festival.
Mhm.
So, article.
Anaweza kuwa ng'andara. Kipindi chetu.
So actually, it is not actually the only festival. Actually, it's festival. Sorry, Jibijaba. There is also a festival in among the Dutch people, which is called the Black Face, where they celebrate. They paint their faces with black tint, with black. I mean, black what? Black. Okay, they are black. Like
Makeup.
with black
Don't
makeup.
makeup.
Yeah, it's called the black face. You see a lot of the Dutch people doing that. Actually, why do they commemorate this? However much most of these festivals they are linked to other things other than the black people, but the reality is actually they're representing the black people. So Denham Smith says history has whitewashed, but everything's being revealed now. True, because there are a lot of actually people who research more about where they come from. That's why we see a lot of Black Americans actually today going out and looking for their DNAs to know where they really come from. So it is very hard and it is very dangerous whenever time passes, technology increases. I was here and actually there was a forensic photo. I know Jibijaba, you saw that because you were here by that time in the same video. A forensic photo of the first, is it the first person the first Briton, actually, the first person actually in Britain in a person in 3,000, in 300,000 years ago. Actually, the forensic photo, depending on the DNA, actually they combined with the bones that they had, they collected. It actually, the forensic report it was of a black person. This was completely a black person. Should we say that these people traveled from Africa? They existed. Of course, they existed before. You know, Mosquito says blackface with the red lips. You mean say, yeah, I mean that. You know, Mosquito, blackface. Let me try to share the photo of that.
they used to give, but of course, they said that most. So this is a guy who had a black skin complexion, and he was a duke before even slavery began. All right. So we know that we have had a lot of family secrets in Europe, and we've seen a lot of families that have tried to hide Europe trying to hide families of the black people who were prominent in their kingdom. All right. So a lot of black British and Irish families were actually forgotten, but most of these people don't really understand, because now there are names that were categorized with black people in Europe. Names like Bulla, Morgan, Pearson, and other names. Whenever they would name you that name, you would know that you had a black a black person as your grandparent, or you come from a lineage of the black people. But of course, the historical landscape often overshadowed the mainstream of this history in, of course, Europe. Now, Queen Charlotte Sophia of Mecklenburg with African ancestry is another pivotal character. Queen Charlotte, and I think some of you have even seen this movie of Queen Charlotte. It is a series that a lot of people enjoyed watching. It is not a fiction theory. It was based on a true story of the black people. But of course, we know that for quite some time, people don't usually love to associate nobility with the black skin complexion, more especially in European countries. So, but we have seen black people who have, of course, been great, and they have had. Oh my God. We have seen black people, for those who follow history, who have been great straight up from, of course, the one that people usually love a lot, the Jesus.
Maybe I didn't watch it, but I remember the program you are referring to.
Yeah, I think most ladies watched it because it's kind of love story, and men don't watch such kind of movies. So I guess that's why you didn't watch it. It was filled with the love stories. But ah, a lot of we have now of recent we have seen a lot of people trying, actually, let me say Hollywood trying so much to bring out the picture. They are trying to react the history of black people. They are bringing it on script and on the front pages, and at the end of it you realize the movie directors, the script writers, and the writers of this movie are actually black people who are trying to sensitize other through these particular movies that actually we as men like only action movies.
Inspiration. Yeah, I like watching inspiration movies and thrillers. I like watching an inspiration and thriller.
Okay.
Most especially when they are based on true events.
Like, I don't know. I don't know what I love about watching things. I love watching everything. Yeah. Well, so, like I was saying, they have started to bring this on screen, and if at all, um, you realize that if at all you've watched some of these movies, you realize that this time round in Hollywood, we are seeing black uh, movie producers, script writers, and art the cabinets are trying so much to bring out the true history of the black people. Though we were used to watching the sad version of it all, the stories of slavery, the stories of migrations, and what have you. This time around, we are seeing some movies that explain or tell us how great some Africans were and what actually they achieved in Europe and other countries. Um, that's the sometime back, Europe, by the way, uh, Europe was one of the countries that had a big population of black people, um, um, immigrants, and those. Actually, I would say those in diaspora. It was one of the countries that had black diaspora people, um, overshadowing other countries. But we realized that because most of the black people felt they had that attachment. Let me say, for example, with the countries like UK and others, they felt like they had that attachment. I don't know why, because they felt like it is easy for you to go and live in UK and all that kind of stuff. And UK had also given a chance to a lot of African migrants to settle there, which is not like nowadays. Um, those days before, a lot of people used to go study there, settle there, and what have you, because they thought they had an attachment with those people over there. But and nowadays, of course, everything is changing. And then people started choosing America becoming their first priority and all that. I don't know why, whatever it is. But African people have been everywhere. I'll use that word, not most places, but they've been everywhere in the world.
Even on the moon, is it? Was it? Is
Mhm.
a comment. Even on the moon, there is a Nigerian selling watches. But the Nigerian sell watches in USA too much. It can be possible. It can be possible to be Java. The Nigerians sell watches too much. And I know they are fake watches. And the Nigerian Bama.
I'm really loving her. I'm really loving it.
This shows has a lot needed information in that of African children really need to know that is from GNO mosquito.
Thank you so much, mosquito. So that is um there is a lot to Africa's history than what most of us have learned. And it's a pity that what we need to learn is not what we are being told. It takes a will and strength for African people to try so very much to, of course, find out what what it means to be a black person and what they stand for as black people, which most of us neglect. We allow the Europeans and the outside um, people to describe us, and this is the problem. Most of the Africans were described already, and they accepted that description, and we are living that description. And this is why we get everything almost wrong, because we allow them to describe and identify us the way they found it fit, and we accepted it willingly, and we try to live that, yet we're actually not. Thank you so much, guys, for watching Blackout